Luxury often hides its secrets behind tall gates. For global football superstar Neymar, life at his sprawling mansion in Mangaratiba, Brazil appears to be the definition of success. Expensive cars line the driveway. Private parties fill the calendar. Guests arrive and leave at all hours. From the outside, it looks like the perfect life of one of football's most famous players. But behind those gates, a different story has now emerged. A former cook who worked inside Neymar's mansion has taken the football star to court, alleging that the glamorous lifestyle came at a personal cost she was forced to carry alone. According to the lawsuit filed in Brazil's labor courts, the woman claims she was pushed to work exhausting shifts that sometimes stretched as long as 16 hours a day. What began as a standard cooking job quickly transformed into something far more demanding. Her contract reportedly stated that she would work weekday shifts beginning at 7 in the morning and ending in the late afternoon. But she says the reality inside the mansion looked nothing like what she agreed to. Instead, she alleges that the workday often extended late into the night. The reason? Large gatherings at the mansion meant preparing meals not only for Neymar himself, but sometimes for dozens of guests. On certain occasions, she claims she had to cook for as many as 150 people attending events or parties hosted at the estate. In her complaint, the cook describes carrying heavy groceries, preparing massive quantities of food, and standing in the kitchen for hours without adequate rest. Over time, she says the physical strain began to take its toll. The lawsuit claims the intense workload eventually led to injuries affecting her back and hips, forcing her to seek medical treatment. Now she is asking the court for compensation. The amount reportedly totals about 262,000 Brazilian reais, which is roughly 40,000 US dollars. The claim includes unpaid overtime, labor damages, and compensation related to the alleged physical injuries she says were caused by the workload. But the legal complaint goes even further. The cook's lawsuit does not only name Neymar himself. It also includes the third-party employment company that initially hired her to work at the mansion. Together, they are now facing scrutiny in a case that raises uncomfortable questions about working conditions inside the home of one of football's most recognizable stars. And for fans around the world, the story introduces a striking contrast. On the field, Neymar is celebrated for his skill and flair. Off the field, the court will now decide whether life inside his mansion was far less glamorous for the people working behind the scenes. What turns a workplace complaint into a serious legal dispute is not just accusation. It is documentation. According to the lawsuit filed against Neymar, the former cook claims she carefully documented the difference between the job she accepted and the job she actually performed. The contract she signed reportedly outlined a structured weekly schedule. Her working hours were supposed to begin at 7 in the morning and end at 5 in the afternoon from Monday through Thursday, with a slightly shorter day on Friday ending at 4. Weekends were not part of the agreement, but the complaint says those boundaries quickly disappeared. Inside the mansion in Mangaratiba, the cook claims the kitchen rarely closed when the contract said it should. Guests arrived late. Parties stretched into the night. Meals were expected long after normal work hours had ended. Instead of clocking out in the afternoon, she alleges that many evenings extended far beyond sunset. Some nights reportedly ended close to midnight. The scale of the work also changed dramatically. Rather than preparing meals for a household, she says she was frequently tasked with cooking for large groups attending gatherings at the estate. The lawsuit claims some events required food preparation for up to 150 guests. That level of service required more than simple cooking. According to the complaint, she had to handle large grocery deliveries, carry heavy food supplies, and prepare multiple dishes simultaneously under intense time pressure. The kitchen became less like a private residence and more like a small event catering operation. Over time, the lawsuit states the physical strain became impossible to ignore. The cook claims she began experiencing severe pain in her back and hips after long shifts standing and lifting heavy supplies. Medical consultations reportedly confirmed injuries that she believes were caused by the workload. These health problems now form part of the legal claim. But the lawsuit is not limited to physical injury. It also accuses the defendants of violating Brazilian labor regulations by failing to pay proper overtime and by requiring work outside the agreed schedule. Because of that, the compensation request includes unpaid overtime wages, labor damages, and medical-related costs. The total amount being sought reportedly reaches approximately 262,000 Brazilian reais. And the case does not only target the football star. The legal complaint also names the employment agency responsible for hiring the cook and placing her inside Neymar's household. That detail introduces another layer of complexity, because if the claims are proven in court, responsibility may extend beyond the mansion itself. It may reach the hiring system that put the worker there in the first place. And that is where the story begins to escalate. Not just a complaint, but a legal battle now unfolding in Brazil's labor courts. Legal cases rarely move quickly, but once a lawsuit enters the court system, every claim begins a process of verification. For the former cook who filed the complaint against Neymar, the next stage involves the Brazilian labor court examining whether the allegations match the legal standards required for compensation. Labor disputes in Brazil often revolve around one central question: what exactly was the employment relationship? In this case, that question is critical. The cook's lawsuit argues that while she worked inside Neymar's mansion, her employment was technically arranged through a third-party service provider responsible for domestic staffing. Because of this arrangement, the legal responsibility for working conditions may not rest on a single defendant. Instead, both Neymar and the hiring agency could be required to answer the court's questions. Brazilian labor courts are known for closely examining the details of daily work routines. Judges often review contracts, payment records, witness testimony, and sometimes even digital communications that reveal the true structure of employment relationships. If the cook's allegations are accurate, investigators may ask how a schedule meant to end in the late afternoon allegedly expanded into shifts that sometimes stretched toward midnight. They may examine how often large gatherings took place at the Mangaratiba property and whether those events required additional staff or overtime arrangements. Another focus will likely be health claims. The lawsuit states that the physical demands of the job caused injuries to the cook's back and hips. Medical reports, treatment records, and expert evaluations may become important evidence in determining whether the workload exceeded reasonable expectations for a domestic kitchen employee. Labor courts also frequently analyze the concept of subordination, meaning whether the worker operated under direct supervision and instruction from the employer. If the court determines that the cook was effectively operating under Neymar's household management, it could influence how responsibility is assigned. But it is equally important to remember that allegations in a lawsuit do not automatically equal legal guilt. At this stage, the claims represent one side of the story presented to the court. Public records show that the complaint is still moving through legal channels, and no final judgment has been issued. For Neymar, the case represents an unexpected off-field controversy at a time when his career has already been closely watched by global fans and media. For the cook, the lawsuit represents an attempt to obtain compensation for what she describes as an unsustainable and damaging work environment. And for observers following the case, the next phase will determine whether the claims withstand legal scrutiny. Because once the court begins examining contracts, schedules, and medical reports, the dispute moves beyond headlines. It becomes a matter of evidence. And evidence is what ultimately decides cases like this. Behind every labor dispute lies a deeper question. Why did the situation escalate in the first place? In the lawsuit filed against Neymar, the cook's claims highlight a dynamic that often appears in disputes involving wealthy households and domestic workers. When a private residence doubles as a social hub, the line between normal household work and event-scale service can become blurred. Neymar's mansion in Mangaratiba is not an ordinary home. The property is known for hosting large gatherings, celebrations, and visits from friends, teammates, and celebrities. For staff working inside the estate, those events can dramatically increase the scale of daily responsibilities. Preparing meals for a single family requires planning and routine. Preparing meals for dozens or even over 100 guests requires an entirely different level of organization and labor. According to the Cook's lawsuit, that shift in workload may have happened without the additional staff or overtime protections that would normally accompany such demands in a commercial kitchen environment. If that claim proves accurate, it highlights a common structural issue within domestic employment arrangements around the world. Unlike hotels, restaurants, or event venues, private households often operate without the same formal staffing structures. Workers may find themselves performing tasks far beyond their original job descriptions, simply because the environment evolves. Legal systems frequently step in when those boundaries become contested. Brazil's labor laws are designed to protect employees from excessive working hours and to guarantee compensation for overtime when workloads exceed contracted schedules. This is one reason the Cook's lawsuit focuses heavily on the alleged 16-hour workdays. The number itself becomes symbolic, not just of long hours, but of a potential gap between what was agreed upon and what was actually required inside the mansion. At the same time, high-profile cases involving celebrities often attract intense public attention. For Neymar, whose career has been followed globally for more than a decade, even a relatively modest financial dispute can generate widespread headlines. The compensation being requested, about 262,000 Brazilian reais, is small compared to the fortunes associated with elite football. But the broader implications extend beyond money. Cases like this raise questions about labor practices within celebrity households and the responsibilities of employers who rely on contracted domestic staff. They also spotlight the role of recruitment agencies that place workers in those environments. If the court determines that the hiring structure contributed to the alleged workload imbalance, responsibility could be shared between multiple parties. Ultimately, the dispute is no longer just about a cook and a football star. It has become a small window into a much larger conversation about labor, power, and accountability inside the private worlds of global celebrities. And those conversations rarely stay quiet for long. For now, the case rests inside Brazil's labor court system. What began as a private employment dispute has now become a public legal matter involving one of football's most recognizable names. Until the court reviews the evidence, the allegations remain exactly that, claims waiting to be tested through legal procedure. For Neymar, the lawsuit represents an unusual kind of challenge. Throughout his career, the Brazilian star has faced defenders, rival clubs, injuries, and intense media attention. But legal disputes involving household employees fall into a completely different arena. This time, the contest is not decided by goals or assists. It will be decided by contracts, schedules, and testimony. Brazil's labor courts will likely examine several key factors before reaching any decision. Judges may review the cook's original employment contract, records of working hours, payment history, and medical documentation related to the injuries she claims resulted from the workload. Witness statements may also become important. Other staff members who worked inside the Mangaratiba mansion could potentially be asked to confirm whether the workdays regularly extended beyond the hours outlined in the contract. If the court finds that labor rules were violated, compensation could be awarded to the worker. If not, the case may be dismissed. For now, both outcomes remain possible. What makes the dispute particularly interesting is the contrast between scale and symbolism. Financially, the amount being requested, about 262,000 Brazilian reais, is relatively small compared to the earnings associated with elite football. But symbolically, the case touches on something much larger. It highlights the invisible workforce that supports the lifestyles of global celebrities. Behind luxury estates, private parties, and glamorous social media moments, there are often teams of workers responsible for making those experiences possible. Cooks, cleaners, drivers, security staff, gardeners. Most of the time, those workers remain completely outside the spotlight. Legal disputes like this one briefly shift the camera in their direction. For viewers and fans, the case also raises a simple but powerful question. When success brings extraordinary wealth and influence, what responsibilities follow? Because while stadiums measure greatness through trophies and statistics, the real measure of character often appears in far quieter places, behind closed doors, inside everyday interactions. For Neymar, the legal process will determine how this particular story ends. But for the broader conversation about labor and accountability, the final verdict may only be the beginning. And sometimes, the most revealing stories in sports happen far away from the field.